Hey, you guys. Welcome back to the salon. So, 2 decades ago, back in the distant mists of 2002, which, fuck, man, I can't believe how old I'm getting. But way back then, the director, Mick Garris, probably best known for his Stephen King adaptations, but he's done a bunch of other things as well. He organized what has to be one of the most epic horror-themed dinner parties of all time. And it took place at a restaurant in Sherman Oaks, California. Now, coming to this dinner party were such genre legends as John Carpenter, Joe Dante, Guillermo del Toro, Stuart Gordon, John Landis, Tobe Hooper, Larry Cohen, Don Coscarelli, and Bill Malone. Man, to have been a fly on the wall, or in the soup, I suppose, since it was at a restaurant, at that particular meeting, that must have been fucking amazing. That particular evening, Mick Garris had called all of his director friends there to propose something like a horror anthology series, but not exactly like anything that had been done previously. So over the next couple of years, Garris kind of like put the whole thing into production, and he approached some other directors as well and asked them if they'd be interested in contributing. And a whole bunch of them, including Dario Argento, Lucky McKee, John McNaughton, Takashi Miike, Brad Anderson, Tom Holland, among others, like they all agreed and, that they were going to participate as well. Now, I distinctly remember back in the mid-2000s that there was a lot of buzz about this project in the horror community when it was first announced, because these were going to be hour-long, uncensored horror films based on stories by H.P. Lovecraft, Richard Matheson, Clive Barker, Joe R. Lansdale, people like that, and they were all going to be directed by horror legends, horror royalty. And it was all going to be on TV. I mean, it was pay TV, sure, it was Showtime, which, a lot of people didn't have. I had it, but you know what I mean, a lot of people didn't. But it was TV nonetheless. And like I said, it hadn't really been done before. These were essentially just like hour-long movies that they were going to put on TV and that they weren't going to be cut, and there was no commercials and anything. So there really hadn't been anything like this, like specifically like this on TV before. And when they first started airing, I very eagerly sat there and watched them as soon as they were available to view. Now, at the time that I first watched them back in the day, I enjoyed most of them quite a bit, but over the years, my memory of them kind of slowly faded, and I found that I had forgotten even some of the better episodes, so it was kind of instructive to watch all of them again, fairly recently, and it was also really gratifying for me that many of them were actually far better than I remembered. So on this video, we're going to take a look back at both seasons of the iconic Masters of Horror and see how it all shakes out as to, what episodes I thought were really good or really sucky or were just kind of in between. So let's kind of get into it. So case in point for one that I hadn't remembered all that much about, from my first viewing, but then on the second viewing, it instantly moved into my top 3 episodes of season 1. And this is the John Carpenter directed Cigarette Burns, which I believe originally aired as episode 8 of season 1. I think a great deal of my enthusiasm for this episode might be due to the presence of Norman Reedus, who, of course, in subsequent years went on to ultimate mega stardom for his role as Daryl Dixon on The Walking Dead. But everything in this hit the right notes for me this time around. Udo Kier is in it as well, and he's always great. I love him. And he just chews the scenery like no one but Udo Kier can, and it's amazing. He plays this real reclusive, super, super rich squintillionaire dude, and he hires a man, played by Norman Reedus, to procure the single remaining print of this very mysterious film, which is called La Fin Absolue du Monde, or The Absolute End of the World. Now, this movie had the reputation of having the first and only time that it screened, back in the old days, everybody in the theater just went completely apeshit and started killing each other and shit like that. I absolutely love stories about cursed movies, and this is probably one of the best examples, if not the best example, of this trope that I've ever seen. So there is like a real genuine suspense to it. There's like a really eerie, menacing tone that kind of like permeates the whole thing. And there's a whole bunch of gore, including probably the best moment. Like, it's very, very memorable, in which Udo Kier's character threads his own intestines through a movie projector after he watches this cursed film that makes everybody go crazy. So yeah, this was a great fucking episode. Maybe my favorite one. It's kind of like hard to tell, but it's definitely up there. Also very good and worth a mention are the Stuart Gordon directed Dreams in the Witch House, which I think very effectively captured the very spooky otherworldly feel of the H.P. Lovecraft story that it was based on. There was also Deer Woman, which was directed by John Landis. Interestingly, I think that I disliked this episode the first time around, but I appreciated it more like on my second viewing. It's far more a black comedy than straight horror, which is, you know, pretty consistent with Landis's usual MO. Also, it has this real kind of like absurdist premise, which is based on a Native American legend. But there was like plenty of blood, and the guy, like the protagonist, who was played by Brian Benben, the way that he was just like going around being like super snarky and like really witty and everything like that, I thought he was like fucking hilarious. I don't remember why I didn't like it the first time. Maybe just because I was like, well, that wasn't scary, that was supposed to be, that's just funny, you know what I mean? But I think because I knew what to expect, that this is the funny one, so I appreciated it a lot more. But like I said, it's way more, it's over the top and it's gory and stuff like that, but it's way more like funny than scary. Lastly, and surprisingly, was Dario Argento's Jennifer, which starred Steven Weber. He also wrote the teleplay, matter of fact, Steven Weber did, based on a Bruce Jones story. Steven Weber, incidentally, was also in that Shining TV adaptation, which I'm really not a fan of. I don't blame Steven Weber for that, though, not one bit. I've always been a big Dario Argento fan, obviously, as anybody that's been around here for any length of time knows. But I think we can pretty much all agree that his output after about 1996 or 1997, though not really like up to his former glory, let's call it that. This episode, though, I have to say was pretty decent. Although I will also add a caveat to that I honestly think it could have been directed by anyone. Like, it was good, it was competently directed, and it was a good story and stuff like that, but there wasn't any of that like Argento magic or that Argento style. If you had told me somebody else would have directed it, I wouldn't have questioned it, you know what I mean? So there's that. It did drag a little bit in parts, I thought, but the story, which is actually about a man who's being essentially like slowly bewitched by a deformed succubus, was actually like pretty disquieting. The gore was real excessive, which I enjoyed, and I really did like the succubus makeup. I thought that was like really cool. Now here's the shitty ones, or ones, I'm not going to say shitty across the board, because I'm sure every one of these is like somebody's favorite, but these are the ones that I didn't really like. So the episodes that I frankly could have done without included, sadly, Mick Garris's contribution in season 1 to his own very groundbreaking series. Like I said, I'm not shitting on Mick Garris. He seems like a lovely man. He's always on all of the horror documentaries and stuff, and he just seems like a cool guy. But I don't know, like I feel like this one was one of the weaker episodes. And this was called Chocolate. I thought it had a very kind of like flimsy story. The execution was kind of lame. And I don't know, it's just, I got a whole like, I don't know, I just got like a vibe of just like why botherness from the whole enterprise, and I was just kind of like, boo. It was that kind of thing. The only other episode that in season 1 that I actually found unforgivable was by Joe Dante, and that's another thing that's sucky because I really actually like Joe Dante's stuff usually, but he did one called Homecoming in season 1. Now, zombies as political satire can be and has been done very well by various other directors. But this episode came across as like so heavy-handed that I just couldn't even. Like it just really kind of made me cringe a little bit. Even though I happen to agree with the politics of the episode, I was just kind of like, it was just like way over the top for me. It was just so heavy-handed. Added to that, it's like the fact that the subject matter, which was current at the time, being about like all of these, veterans that like dead veterans that come back from the dead to vote out the people that sent them over to the it's shitty war in the first place. I kind of feel like this was very of its time. So if you see it nowadays, it seems a little bit dated and it seems like less relatable. Not necessarily the fault of the subject matter, but you know. Now I did really like Thea Gill in this, plays this real ball-busting Ann Coulter, it's supposed to be like Ann Coulter, but you know, they don't call her that, obviously. So her character was very like amusing, and she had a very satisfying fate at the end of it. But otherwise, I was just kind of like, man, Joe Dante, like, tone it down some. Like, you can't actually make a point without smashing us upside the head with a wrecking ball, you know what I mean? I just thought, I liked the idea of the story. I just thought that it was just way, way, way too, it just laid it on way too thick and was, like, way over the top and was, like, way too obvious, and I don't really like obvious things. So I didn't really care for it all that much. Now here we are with kind of like the mid-tier ones from season 1, which, you know, were good, watchable, decent, not fantastic, but I really actually did enjoy these overall. I really did like the one Pick Me Up, which was actually directed by Larry Cohen. Which actually had a really good premise, which was like essentially competing serial killers, and had some really good like tense scenes. Also, the always welcome presence of Fairuza Balk. I love her. She's one of the raddest chicks ever. So she was in it. So she really elevated that episode quite a bit. Also, Incident on and Off a Mountain Road, which was directed by Don Coscarelli from a Joe R. Lansdale story, was also really watchable, and had Angus Scrimm, who was Tall Man in the Phantasm movies. He's great in it, so he again like elevated that episode as well. You also had one called Sick Girl, which was directed by Lucky McKee, and that was like pretty fun, very creepy crawly. And it had Angela Bettis in it, who was also in Lucky McKee's May, obviously, and she was playing a character very similar to the character that she played in May. She played like an etymologist who was really into bugs but wasn't really like so much into people, so there was that. There was also a Clive Barker adaptation called Heckle's Tale, and that was directed by John McNaughton. It was good, but I kind of feel like it could have been better, like given the source material. And same deal with Dance of the Dead, which, I mean, given the status of everybody involved in this episode, I mean, the story was by Richard Matheson, the teleplay was by his son, Richard Christian Matheson, and it was directed by Toby Hooper. Also, Robert Englund was in it, like as a kind of depraved club owner. I kind of feel like with all of that, it should have been incredible, but instead it was just kind of like serviceable, and it was I found it a little bit disjointed, so I was kind of disappointed because I didn't love it. The Fair-Haired Child, finally, was entertaining, but not really all that memorable. So I think that was like a very, very like exactly middle of the road type of episode. So you didn't actually think I was going to leave this one off, did you? Because of course I was not. Now, this episode, Imprint, was actually slated to air as the last episode of season 1. It was directed by Takashi Miike, obviously. But it was already notorious well before its air date arrived, because Showtime, when they screened it later, like they refused to broadcast it, even though it's pay TV. I don't know what the fuck. But they were like, no, this is like highly disturbing, and the violence was intensely graphic, and they're just like, yeah, we can't show that. So it actually didn't air as part of the original series, during the original run. It was released to DVD, like separately, in the latter part of 2006. And thankfully, over the years, like you can now it's now available to stream as part of the series as it was originally intended. Now, as of this recording, it's the whole series, both seasons are available on Tubi to watch for free, and maybe or other places, like maybe you want to check Peacock or Pluto or whatever the hell. But yeah, there's other places you can get it. But I saw them on Tubi just, the same day that I'm recording this. So that's where they were. So, and Imprint is in its rightful place at the end of the season. Now, it's very like watching it now, it's pretty easy to see why Showtime chickened out, like at the time. Although, to be honest, if they hadn't been familiar with Takashi Miike at all, they shouldn't have been surprised by what they asked him to do it, and then he's like, and I did it, and they're like, no, not like that. You know what I mean? I was just kind of like, okay. Just kind of a shame. Like, you can see it easily now, but like back in the day, it was kind of a shame because this is actually like the best episode of season 1, like by a significant margin. So pretty much the entirety of the story takes place inside like a Japanese brothel where an American journalist who's played by Billy Drago has gone. He's kind of like looking for the great love of his life, who is like this prostitute named Komomo, who he had promised to rescue and take back to America with him. Now, so he goes there to get her, but he doesn't find her. Like, instead, he finds this other prostitute has like this really weird looking, like disfigured face. And she tells him this increasingly convoluted story of what happened to the doomed Komomo. The flashback scenes of Komomo's torture, she supposedly stole the madam's jade ring, that's why they were torturing her, are pretty fucking horrific, gotta say. And even me, who's seen like some pretty fucked up shit in movies, I was just kind of like sitting there going, oh, you know what I mean? It was like that kind of stuff. If you want to call me a weenie, you can, but it's not... I mean, I've seen worse, but it's still like pretty uncomfortable to watch. Also, too, another thing that was uncomfortable to watch, there were like the deformed girl was talking about her own childhood, and there were scenes of like her mom like dumping essentially like buckets full of aborted fetuses like into a stream and shit like that. So I was like, that's a little yucky. But yeah, so there's that. And by the end of this episode, honestly, I kind of felt like I'd been hit by a bus a little bit, but in a good way, if that makes any sense. You know, the best horror, I think, like, should probably like shake you out of your complacency, not necessarily just by being gross for the sake of it, but I think if it makes you uncomfortable, then that's probably good. Then it's done its job. On that score, I think Imprint really succeeded in spades. And to be honest, it's like I enjoyed watching it again. And like I said, I think it's the best episode of season 1 by, a mile. But I don't know if I'd necessarily want to sit through it again, because like I'd sat through it 2 times and I was just kind of like, and even though I knew it was coming the second time, I was just kind of like, yeah, this is pretty nasty. But I mean, it's still the best episode, I think. And probably after Imprint, I'd probably have to say like Cigarette Burns the second, but like I said, they all kind of like move around. They're all worth watching, other than the 2 that I mentioned that I didn't really care for. But all of the other ones I thought were absolutely worth watching. Now, let's jump in and start talking about season 2. Now, the quality of the second season, I thought, was a lot more consistent than the first, in the sense that there were no like overtly terrible episodes, but there weren't really any jaw-dropping Imprint quality ones either. So they were much more like all in one kind of pack rather than being like all over the place. Many of them were quite good, I thought, and all of them in this season were at least watchable, like to greater or lesser degrees. Now, there were 2 episodes of season 2 that for me stood out as being like the best examples of the season. The first of these was Family, which was directed by John Landis and starred the lovable George Wendt of Cheers fame, Norm, that guy, playing quite brilliantly against type as a suburban serial killer and corpse collector was what he was doing. I'm not entirely sure if the concept for this story was at least maybe partly inspired by the Miriam Allen DeFord short story from 1961, which was called A Death in the Family, which I actually talked about back when I talked about Alfred Hitchcock Presents The Stories That Scared Even Me, that book, because it was in that book. So because the premise, at least like the opening part, is kind of similar. But John Landis's family, like for Masters of Horror, end up going in a lot of different directions than that story. And this one actually has like a really great twist ending. George Wendt is great in it. He's very, very schlubby. He's just like this lonely bachelor psychopath type of dude. And the shit that he's doing is like really, really fucked up, obviously, but you still kind of feel bad for him. Like he's still like pretty sympathetic. I mean, even when he's killing little girls and killing old ladies to, deflesh and add to his little skeleton family that he has going there. So it's pretty twisted, and it's kind of a black comedy, and I kind of like that. But yeah, it's pretty fucking great. Now, the second standout of season 2, I thought, was Right to Die, which was directed by Rob Schmidt. And this actually, it seemed like it was inspired a little bit by kind of the whole brouhaha over the Terry Schiavo case. If you guys remember that, you can Wikipedia if you don't know what I'm talking about. And it also stars the terrific Martin Donovan, who I've been a fan of for a really long time, ever since because he used to work with the director Hal Hartley a lot, like back in the 80s and 90s, and he was always great in that. And I always thought like he seemed like he got more famous like as he got a little bit older, but I liked his like performances when he was younger, like in Hal Hartley's movies. So Martin Donovan plays this two-timing dentist, and he's been cheating on his wife with his very buxom dental assistant. Now, shortly after the wife finds out about the affair, the wife and her wayward husband are involved in this horrible car accident in which all of the wife's skin is burned off, but she doesn't die like right away. So Martin Donovan's character, Dr. Adulterer, he gets into this extended legal battle with his mother-in-law, like essentially for the right to turn off her life support. But it soon comes to pass that he has to change his tune, because every time that his wife flatlines and like they bring her back, because like I said, she's kind of like, you know, on life support and everything, but every time that like she flatlines and they bring her back, when she's dead, she is able to kind of like open up this supernatural scorned woman can of whoop ass, and so she can like, you know, ghostify and like come after him like when she flatlines, and then when they bring her back, you know, he's just like, oh shit, oh okay, now she's gone. So there's that whole thing. So now like he doesn't want her to die, because he knows that like when she dies, she's gonna be able to like fuck with him like forever. Like, you know what I mean? So it's pretty awesome. So I really liked this episode as well, and the makeup like on the burned off lady is like really great. Now, a bunch of the other episodes, while not quite as great as those two, were still like really entertaining, and I really enjoyed them. There was one called Sounds Like, which was directed by Brad Anderson, from a short story by Mike O'Driscoll. And this one was like a really good Twilight Zone episode. It was kind of like about this suburban middle manager type of guy, and his son dies from this really rare heart condition, and the dad like subsequently develops kind of this hypersensitive hearing, and it eventually like drives him insane. I think that premise has been done like before and since, but this was like really well done. It's pretty low key, like, and this is probably like the most low key one, like in the gross out department, because most of the other ones I feel like went all in like with the gore and everything. This one is just like not gory. Like I said, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, but it is like a real nice like slow burn of suspense and like tension that just escalates, and it's like really effective. Then you got Pro-Life, which was directed by John Carpenter, and this is a very taut, I think, like well done story of this very determined 15-year-old pregnant girl, and she kind of gets involved in this demonic battle, like in this sort of besieged abortion clinic. So that was pretty fantastic too. Ron Perlman was great in it. He plays the girl's like fundamentalist, like nutbag dad, and he's great. Very intense, very violent, and actually kind of frightening in times, but it does kind of get a little bit cheesy toward the end, because there's a whole like devil baby angle that I could have done without, but other than that, it was like really good. Then you got Dario Argento's Pelts, which was his second contribution to the series. And this was actually adapted from a short story by F. Paul Wilson. Now, it has kind of a ridiculous premise, but I was down for it. So it's about a fur trader who's actually played by Meatloaf, and he gets his hands on these beautiful raccoon pelts that they almost kind of like hypnotize you, kind of. They're kind of like all glittery, and they're like ooh, and like make you want to pet them and stuff. But what they do is they magically make everybody who works with them, like if you touch them, do unbelievably gory things to themselves that kind of like mirror what was done to the dead animals. So it's very much like an anti-fur kind of thing, and it's just like really, so like people are kind of just like skinning themselves and stuff like that. So it's very icky and very over the top, but it's also like a lot of fun. So it is kind of nice seeing kind of great seeing Meatloaf like cutting parts off of his skin and stuff like that. I don't know why that would entertain me so much, but it did. Then you got your Joe Dante directed Screwfly solution. This one wasn't nearly as overblown as Homecoming from the first season, which I really didn't like. Now, this one did still tackle kind of like hot button socio-political issues from the time. This one actually kind of covers like feminism and male aggression. But this one is actually far less obnoxious than Homecoming was. Like, it's still kind of... I don't know. I still found it a little bit too glib and a little bit too on the nose, like, for my taste. But overall, I quite enjoyed it, and I thought it was like a lot better than Homecoming was. So basically, the episode is positing a sort of apocalyptic type scenario, which involves an unknown biological agent that ramps up male hostility to the point where all the men are killing off all the women. Oh, I should also add that this episode featured both Jason 90210 Priestley and Elliot Mash Gould as high echelon environmental scientists. So I imagine that's the only movie in the history of cinema that you can say that about. So, you know, there's that. Also pretty decent was We All Scream for Ice Cream, which was directed by Tom Holland from a short story by John Ferris. And this was actually a little bit like Stephen King's It, like slightly, you know what I mean? And it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like a supernatural revenge type of story. You got like a mentally slow but very well-liked ice cream man who, you know, dresses up like a clown. And he gets accidentally killed by some horrible miscreant children. Years later, though, this sinister ice cream van is kind of like prowling around the small town streets at night, looking to, I guess, like revisit the sins of the fathers upon the sons, as it were, because, you know, those kids that accidentally killed the ice cream man are now grown up. So now the ice cream man is like coming after their children. So that was also like really, really creepy and well executed. Very good if you're scared of clowns. I'm not, but you know what I mean. If you are, it's probably like pretty good. And rounding out the pretty damn good category, we also have Stuart Gordon's adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, starring the always incredible and amazing Jeffrey Combs as a tormented Edgar Allan Poe, who seems to be living out a couple of his more famous short stories. Or is he? We're not entirely sure. I did think the ending of this one was a little bit of a cop-out, but I will forgive it this time because the performances, especially Jeffrey Combs, who's always fucking great, and he played, Edgar Allan Poe on stage for a very long time, so it was great that they got him to kind of reprise that role in this one. But he's always just like really funny and has like great comedic timing. This one's not like a comedy per se, but it does have like some funny like comic touches in it. But yeah, the gore was solid too. So it was like pretty great all around. Likewise, you got The Washingtonians, which was directed by Peter Medak from a short story written by Bentley Little. The premise of this one was like really, really bizarre. And the execution was very, very overdone and very absurd. So much so that it just like circled around and became awesome again. It's like very, very gory. And it's one of the funniest, like the wackiest episode of the series, basically having to do with like the founding fathers having been cannibals. So there was that. Also pretty good was the final episode, which was Dream Cruise, directed by Norio Tsuruta. Very, very slowly paced, pretty standard J-horror all around. You got your long-haired, like, female ghost, blah, blah, blah. But the story did actually have a few surprises. The cinematography was actually really nice, and it was, like, pretty creepy. So this was, like, not great, but was, like, a pretty good end to the series. Now, a few of the episodes, though, while not bad per se, were just not as good as I was hoping or expecting, given the talent behind them. Like, for example, as much as I love these stories of Ambrose Bierce, I have to say that the Tobe Hooper directed adaptation of The Damned Thing, which also had a teleplay by Richard Christian Matheson, was not particularly engaging or particularly memorable, which is kind of a shame because I do really like that story. So I kind of questioned the decision, like why they thought that was good, like, because that was like the inaugural episode. It was like the first episode of season 2, and it just seemed kind of meh to me, which was kind of a shame. Also a disappointment for similar reasons was Valerie on the Stairs, which was directed by Mick Garris from a very good short story by Clive Barker. Now, I'm a huge fan of Clive Barker's short stories and novels, but I don't know, like maybe to a different degree, like as Stephen King, but his very, very fantastical stories are kind of like hit or miss when adapted to screen. I think it's hard to like adapt his vision a lot of times. This one actually kind of seemed more miss than hit, unfortunately. Now, Tony Todd, who, you know, obviously was also in Candyman, was great in this as a demon. Christopher Lloyd was also great in this. He was very, very manic and very entertaining. But the episode was kind of, I don't know, flimsy. It was a little bit repetitive. And it seemed a little bit silly, like especially toward the end. It just, I mean, the end was kind of like anticlimactic. And I think it got let down by some of the like kind of cheesy special effects at the end as well. Also, gotta say that Mick Garris directed The V Word. You know, he was kind of 0 for 3 on his own episodes of the series he created, which is kind of a shame. So The V Word, I mean, it wasn't a total waste of time, but not really an experience I'd care to revisit, to be honest with you. I mean, the V could have stood for literally anything else, you know, velveteen, vivisection, vagina, anything, you know, and I probably would have enjoyed it more, but since the V stood for vampire, oh, those, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I was kind of like not so enthused. I mean, I talked a little bit about in my video about The Hunger, which I love, but I'm not a huge fan of like vampire. I'm kind of like over vampires, you know what I mean? So not only did you have like vampires, and I was just kind of like, oh, vampires. And then you had like teenage boys into the mix too, and I'm just like, meh, really? All right. I mean, it's watchable, but I was just like I said, I was just a little bit blah about it. So that completes my revisit of both seasons of Masters of Horror. Tell me, did you agree, disagree? What did you think of my picks and how I classified them? You know, do you want to like fight about it? We'll see. We can fight about it in the comments. Like if you have like some differing opinions. That's kind of the fun of this whole enterprise. And thank you as always for dropping by the salon. Remember to like and share this video if you like this content, and subscribe to the Scare Salon if you haven't already. Also go over to scaresalon.com. I post a lot more written content over there, book reviews, movie reviews, all that kind of stuff. I usually post something every day. Scare Salon, the channel over here, I do 2 videos a week. So be sure to check out both things, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.